let your thoughts be known, and I'll get you guys in a timely manner. But we'll start off with the obvious. We'll state the obvious. Vasily Lomachenko looks like $1 million fighting. He looked like $1 million fighting George Kambosos Jr., which is not a surprise. Like, I don't think it should surprise anybody that Lomachenko looked as good as he did. The only mild surprise in the fight was the fact that Lomachenko got the stoppage. You know, Lomachenko hasn't been really getting stoppages in the last, couple of years. It's been, I feel, some years since we've seen Lomachenko come to fruition. And the guy we saw in this fight against Kambosos was Lomachenko. I feel like that was the caliber he was operating at. But what I'll say is this: I think boxing media, boxing fans, and just most people in general in boxing, they get so caught up with what's going on now, what's next, that you sometimes can't grasp the scope and the magnitude of what's happening in the sport right now, because Vasily Lomachenko is 36 years old. He's become the IBF champion at 36 years old. Now, as you guys can see, this list in front of me, this is a list of the oldest champions in every weight class in boxing history. And as you guys can see, the oldest lightweight champion of all time is Juan Manuel Marquez at 37 years old in 96 days. Now, Lomachenko is about a year short of that. But the fact that he's operating at this level, I'm not no Lomachenko fanboy. A lot of people got butthurt earlier today when I dropped my video and I said that Lomachenko has nothing to prove, which is the truth. He doesn't have nothing more to prove. He scaled weight classes, and the same thing could be said for somebody like Terrence Crawford, right? I'm not gonna be biased. Terrence Crawford doesn't really have anything to prove either. He's going to the Hall of Fame, just like Lomachenko is going to the Hall of Fame. I just hold Terrence Crawford to a higher standard than Lomachenko because I think he's better than Lomachenko. I think he's greater than Lomachenko, but same thing, right? Now, the fact that he's become I know it's easy to say, oh, well, BT, he beat George Kambosos Jr. That's not really impressive because George Kambosos Jr. hasn't really looked good since he beat Lopez, which is more than a fair point. George Kambosos Jr. and his two fights against Devin Haney, Maxie Hughes, and Lomachenko has looked like, a C-class fighter. Nothing short of a C-class fighter. But it's not so much that he beat George Kambosos Jr. It's the manner in which he beat him, because for all the talk about what Devin Haney did against George Kambosos Jr. in those 24 rounds, what he didn't do against George Kambosos Jr. is stop him, right? So that's a feather in Lomachenko's cap, especially when you consider Devin Haney is smack dab right in the middle of his prime. Lomachenko is damn near 40. He's closer to 40 than he is 30. You know what I'm saying? So that makes it more impressive. Not who he beat, but the fashion in which he beat him, and the fact that he's only about maybe a year short away of being the oldest lightweight champion in the history of boxing. That deserves respect. That deserves nothing but just the absolute praise. Not that he beat Kambosos, but the fact that it's how he beat him in the age, in the fashion in which he beat him. That, because like I said, it's right there for you. You can choose to see it or not see it, but only Juan Manuel Marquez won the lightweight world title over Lomachenko. So that's something that should be taken very, very serious, and I think people should give Lomachenko his just due. And I say this as a guy who I made videos about Lomachenko being overrated. I made videos about Lomachenko not being as great as the Naoya Inoue 5 years ago. People like to put down Lomachenko now and say Inoue is greater than him now, but I was talking about that 5 years ago when it wasn't popular. So I don't want to hear about, oh, True School, you're a fanboy of Lomachenko and you just think that Lomachenko, you're trying to protect Lomachenko from Shakur and Tank, which, by the way, I'll have plenty to say on that later on in the live. But give the man his due. Not a lot of fighters at that age can operate at that level, and I think he deserves his respect, no matter how tailor-made you think George Kambosos Jr. was for Vasily Lomachenko. So that's the first thing I will say clearly here on True School Sports when it comes to that subject. Now, as far as George Kambosos Jr., because he needs to be addressed. George Kambosos needs to be addressed about, how he hasn't been performing. There's been a lot of talk in boxing about George Kambosos Jr. being a one-hit wonder, being the Vanilla Ice of boxing, being the Milli Vanilli of boxing, because, look, I give George his credit, and I like George. I don't want to make this as like I'm putting down George, because I have a lot of respect for George Kambosos Jr. I think it's actually better to be a George Kambosos Jr., where you can actually look yourself in the mirror when your career is done and know that you fought the best, and know that you were willing to take on any and all comers, regardless of the outcome. So I respect George Kambosos Jr. but I'm talking about him as an elite, world-class, creme de la creme, top-shelf fighter. He had two very close fights against Mickey Bay and Lee Selby in which he could have lost. He won both those fights by split decision. So he could have been 0-2. Could have lost those fights, right? Then he fought Teofimo Lopez, which he won by. That was the fight that put him on the map. That was the big one. And really and truthfully, he's never recaptured the form that he had that night. And he's gone through a whole slew of issues in his career, from not paying his coach, Javier Centeno, or his manager, Peter Kahn. They had to go through a lawsuit down here in South Florida in Broward County Court. He's built his own gym, had a bunch of different trainers now, and had a couple of different trainers now, and he hasn't been able to really find that winning formula. Even though he got a win against Maxie Hughes, I don't think he beat Maxie Hughes. I thought he lost that fight too. So George Kambosos Jr., I think we could definitely say he got the most out of his career for the skills he does have, or as some people would say, the lack thereof. George Kambosos Jr. has shown himself to be one of boxing's greatest overachievers. So is he boxing's ultimate one-hit wonder? I would probably say yeah, because he was not able to ever recapture that form again. And, you know, it makes you wonder. It really makes you scratch your head, you know. Like like the tweet on the screen says, Hamed, he says, how did Teofimo Lopez lose to George Kambosos Jr.? And that's a question I think I'll be asking myself, and every box fan will be asking themselves from now till eternity, because the more you watch George Kambosos Jr. fight, I can't speak for you guys, but the more you watch George Kambosos Jr. fight, the harder it is to fathom that Teofimo Lopez, a guy as great as him, a guy that beat Lomachenko, a guy that beat Josh Taylor, made it look easy. When you see those fights from T.O., and then you realize that George Kambosos Jr., who barely scraped by Maxie Hughes, it's like how on God's green earth did T.O. lose to that guy? I know the popular line of thought is that Teofimo Lopez went ahead and, you know, he had health problems and he wasn't feeling his best going to the fight, which is probably true. There's definitely truth to that, right? He wasn't training properly, right? But still, it's like there's such a gap in skill level. Like George Kambosos Jr. has not scored a knockdown since the damn Teofimo Lopez fight. So it's like how the hell did George beat Teofimo Lopez? I mean, the more you watch George fight against other elite competition and even Maxie Hughes, that upset is damn near it's entering Mike Tyson, Buster Douglas like stratosphere, because Teofimo Lopez had an advantage in hand speed. He had an advantage in athleticism, punching power, and George beat him. You know, so it's crazy how, you know, things play out. It's crazy how boxing can play itself out. But yeah, right now, honestly, as far as what could be next for Kambosos, if George Kambosos is still gonna box, I'm trying to think what the hell could be next to George Kambosos Jr. Because he's already made enough money. He secured his financial future, his family's financial future, made multiple millions of dollars. These 3 fights he's had in Australia against Devin Haney twice and Lomachenko, he's drawn over 70,000 people combined. What the hell could he? What is it left to do? He's done stadium fights. He's unified the division. He's been in big fights. He's fought in America, right? The only thing I see for George Kambosos Jr., really and truthfully, is it's a couple of things, and they're not great things, right? Now, as you guys can see, George Kambosos Jr. is ranked number 2 right here. I'm sure it'll be lower. So I can see George Kambosos Jr. being used as like a stepping stone for like a Keyshawn Davis or Raymond Murataya, or maybe like something like that. You know, maybe even Richardson Hitchens and him, who have been talking a lot. Like, I think some sort of step-up fight for Murataya, Hitchens, or you know, Keyshawn Davis. These are the kind of fights that I see George Kambosos Jr. in. I think it's been firmly established through the Devin Haney fights, the Maxie Hughes fight, and the Lomachenko fight that George Kambosos Jr. is not on that creme de la creme, elite, top shelf, world-class level. But for the guys that are striving to get to that elite, top shelf, world-class, creme de la creme level, he could be used as a good opponent for those guys. Even like a Floyd Schofield, I could see him being used for one of the young guns. So that to me is really his future in the sport if he continues to box. The only way I think he gets back to the level he's been at is if he beats him out, if he beats one of those guys, if he upsets a Keyshawn Davis or a Raymond Murataya or a Floyd Schofield, something like that. That's going to be his route back to the big times. One last thing on Kambosos, and then I'll pivot back into more Lomachenko stuff. And by the way, smash that like button, super chat, hit the like button, guys. One last thing on Kambosos before I get back to Lomachenko, because there's a lot to talk about Lomachenko. George hired a Russian coach for this fight that was teaching him more of like the Soviet style. You know, and that's why you saw George Kambosos, I think, like probing more with the jab, keeping his punches a little straighter, not falling forward on his front foot as much as we're accustomed to seeing. Like, I thought in very small moments of the fight, he was doing decent things. I don't think George wasn't winning this fight for a lack of trying. I just think there was such a gap in skill level, and he had a new coach who was showing him new things. So, like, it was never going to work out for him in this particular fight. But I'd like to see George stick with that coach, maybe take some tune-up fights if he wants to keep boxing, and try to perfect some of those things that he was learning. But because I thought there were some moments in the fight where when he would commit to his shots going down low, he had, you know, really small pockets of success. But listen, if we've already seen the best of George Kambosos Jr., which I think we have, then I think he's got the most he could have possibly gotten out of his boxing career now, and that's where I'll leave it when it comes to George and him being a one-hit wonder and not quite being